Okay. Excited to get going. Watching for everybody to get their notifications and come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, everyone. Glad you could make it. It's exciting to have you here, especially after I had to reschedule thanks to the airline situation these days. Everything is all whacked out, but it is lovely to be here. My vacation was very nice. Thank you. It wasn't really so much of a vacation. It was just a couple days down, a couple, back, but it was nice. I had forgotten. I used to live in South Florida. I had forgotten that 91 degrees in South Florida versus 91 degrees in Raleigh, North Carolina are two radically different things. The intensity of the sunshine there drains the life out of me. So, for what that's worth. Hello, Womanopolis. Lovely to see you. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just get things started. Hello. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather. Most people call me Nookie. In addition to living my amazing personal life, I write books, teach classes, and workshops like this about love, sex, romance, and kink for people of all genders, relationship statuses, orientations, and more. I've always been curious and adventurous when it comes to sex. And luckily, I've had partners who've been the same. So I've explored many facets of sexuality in loving and creative ways. All of my experiences thus far have led me to the belief that boundaries are the key to not only saving ourselves, but our relationships. They are what take us from getting by or merely average to healthy, loving, strong, and fan-fucking-tastic. So let's get started. I'll kick us off with an introduction to the book that I'm working on right now and how I'm writing it. So, for those of you who aren't yet aware, I am writing my current book live, and because everything got cattywampus this week, we do have just another day or so to get into that live write using the link I just posted, and to follow along as I write the book. I've got some extra chapters to post today, and sometime tomorrow or Monday, there's actually going to be a price tag on accessing that live. So if you'd like to get in there and access the chapters as I write them and get feedback and interaction about boundaries, do that. Also, for everybody who is a part of the live write, you'll get access to a special discounted price for the Take No Shit workshop. So the book is a deep dive into everything about boundaries, why, where, when, how, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The workshop is your jumpstart. It is your kick in the ass. It is let's build better boundaries now. It is step-by-step hand-holding. We're going to build boundaries and we're going to get it done right. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, make sure to join me for that. Okay, so today we are talking about one of my favorite topics. I have talked about this, a gazillion different times in my kink life, in my non-monogamy. It is an incredibly important foundation concept. And not just that, but it's also like, it's a Venn diagram. So Venn diagrams are, of course, one of my favorite things. They're so easy to work with. And it's really, really fun to play, I guess, with a Venn diagram. So, we're going to talk today about the sweet spot in relationships. So, hello, Sabyasachi. How are you doing today? It's good to see you as usual. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, so the sweet spot. I have a great graphic for you, and I'm going to show it to you here in just a minute. But let's talk about the sweet spot. So, the sweet spot is this is what I want, right? And this is what you want. And that overlap in the middle, that's where we create our relationship, right? So the sweet spot can actually refer to any kind of relationship. I always have to qualify that. Any kind of optional relationship, right? Because caretaking relationships and so on and so forth, there are certain things that you just can't get around. Like, I don't know, changing diapers, right? You don't want to change a diaper. It's got to be done. Or maybe you do. Maybe you're like that. I don't understand it, but I never had kids, thankfully. So any type of optional relationship, and this can mean a friendship, right? I have friends who absolutely adore going antiquing with me. So that antiquing is part of our sweet spot. It's part of the relationship that we build together. Whereas my partner may like going antiquing every now and again, but antiquing and thrifting and so on and so forth is not really a passion for my partner. So it's not a huge part of our sweet spot. Does that make sense? Right? The sweet spot is this is what I want. This is what you want. This is where we overlap. Let's do those things. It sounds simple, right? There's more to it than that, though, because antiques are so much fun. But my partner loves antiques. He just doesn't really love the hunt the way that I do. And he likes to go to really high-end antique places, and I like to go to the places where I have to like dig through and find the treasures. So even though we might enjoy the end results together, we may not enjoy the process in the same way. And so the sweet spot is, I guess, the best way of putting it is a way to validate and accept that we're not always going to be the same. We are individual humans. We're going to overlap by a certain amount, and the rest of it does not have to be a part of whatever relationship we put together. Right? And that can be tough because that is not how we are taught to relationship. It's not how we are taught to talk about relationships. So those of you in the chat, tell me something that you have thought in the past about relationships that is the opposite of being able to do what you want or being able to do things separately. I'll give you a start. What about calling your partner my everything? Now, even if you're monogamous, and the majority of people right now in the United States, for example, will likely identify as monogamous humans, right? They will have one partner that they will say emotionally and sexually true to, right? But even knowing that, the idea of a partner being your everything. Can you see how insidious a concept that is and how it can harm healthy growth and separation and individuality in your combined lives? So let me be clear here. I am not saying that you have to be two people completely separate never relying on each other and, just, kind of coming together like strangers in the night. Not at all. I'm simply saying that what we're looking for here is the sweet spot, the parts where we both want the same thing, especially both want the same thing for the same reasons, right? That's pretty key. So let's look at. Okay, so I like to talk about how boundaries are for ourselves, right? They are not for others. They are not about controlling other people. They are about defining ourselves. Boundaries do not attack others. They do not hurt others. They simply prevent what we have, what we need, from being taken in the wrong way at the wrong time, right? Boundaries are simply a way to say no or no thank you to another adult who is responsible for getting their own needs met. And they may cause discomfort, but they do not cause injury. Okay, let's see what you have to say here. Cobalt says, when my ex and I were both quitting heroin about 18 years ago, we deliberately chose different treatment options and paths so that we could be free to succeed and not have to do quitting together. That seems like a fantastic idea. My ex, one of my exes, was a physical trainer, like to the stars, right? Worked in Soho, New York, worked with famous people, really, really good at what he did. And yet, when he and I worked out together, it drove me fucking insane. We could not make that work together. And that's fine. We didn't try to after, a couple of times we clashed. Roger, hey, lovely to see you. Insidious seems too strong a word, maybe problematic. Okay, I'd actually like to define insidious. Proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects. So actually, I think insidious fits perfectly, because when you start thinking about your partner as your everything or as your the other half, right? Gradually, maybe subtly, it changes how you see another separate adult individual as a part of a whole, right? And it can change how you see yourself as missing that other part, being incomplete without that other part, having nothing without that other part, were they to go away. I appreciate that you brought that up. I mean, problematic is definitely a word that applies for sure. I also think in this case, insidious does apply. Cobalt says, there's a requirement when you think that way to stay put to avoid growing apart. And that is a huge key, right? Like the incentive, when you think in terms of my one and only, what do you do if you don't have that one anymore? Was that your only? Is that your only? The only option you will ever have for your entire life for whatever? That is, to me, an insidious way of thinking. It is not just a monogamous way of thinking, because I don't have any problems with monogamy, even though I am non-monogamous. I don't think non-monogamy is for everyone, just like I don't think monogamy is for everyone. I believe adults have a right to make those decisions for themselves and with their partners in some cases. The challenge that I have is the idea that monogamy, A, must be a default setting versus somebody looking at their options and then making the choice. And I think that that is one of the reasons that you see a lot of cheating in relationships, because it's kind of assumed that you must be monogamous. And therefore, you get into these monogamous relationships. And if you're not suited for that, what happens? You fail over and over and over again. So, one, the idea that that is the default. And two, the idea that just because monogamy is portrayed everywhere, right? That we know how to do it, that we know how to relationship just because we've seen other people relationship. And I think that that's one of the interesting things about alternative relationships and lifestyles, is that when people step into these alternative relationships and lifestyles, they often realize that they don't know quite what they're doing, and will often start then researching and looking for advice and making conscious decisions instead of assumptions. Some thoughts there. Womanopolis says, BDSM is for very special people, though. I'll agree with that in the sense that I've met very special people through BDSM, but I've also met very special people who are not into BDSM or kink, who are vanilla. I personally don't think that BDSM or non-monogamy or swinging or anything, golfing, shopping, I don't think any one activity guarantees superiority over other people in any way. That's me, though. Sabyasachi says, "You're my everything" can sometimes show too much possessive attitude in a relationship. Possessiveness, right? So not only are we then leading ourselves down the path of assuming that we will somehow become one, which, by the way, is a whole can of worms, right? The one of two people. There was a song by The Cure that no one ever truly knows or loves another. It was very emo, very emo. But the point was, two people were in love, and suddenly one of them realized that the other one didn't feel the same way they did, and it crashed their expectations and burned them to ashes around them. I think that's important, right? The possessiveness. This is mine. You are going to think and believe the way I want you to think and believe. Yeah. Da, 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 da. Okay, let's see. Roger says, "Insidious implies evil intent to me. Just look how the word is used in movie titles." That's just me. So yeah, the implication is evil intent, but the actual definition is, again, proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects. And then the similar, in fact, hold on for just 1 second. Let's see. Share screen. Let's see. Window, Chrome tab. Here we go. And then we'll go to. So here, let's just take a look at this. Yeah. Okay. So taking a look at this, right? We have stealthy, subtle, surreptitious, sneaking, cunning, crafty. So I think that you are absolutely valid in saying that that is your experience of the word and feeling of the word, implication of the word. That's not mine. And I feel like insidious is a good adjective for that, for what it's worth. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what we're here for, which is the sweet spot. Okay, so we're talking about boundaries because, of course, I'm writing a book about boundaries. And so I say boundaries are where you end and another begins, right? Which is a simple enough concept. And if anyone knows, like the old joke about the mathematics, the philosophy, and the physics professors, and they're all led to each to an individual room, and in that room each room is a beautiful woman, and they're told that they can go, touch that woman in whatever way they want to, and the mathematician goes in and has his way with this beautiful, willing woman. The philosophy professor goes in and has his way with this beautiful, willing woman. But the physics professor just stands at the door, and they're like, well, why didn't you go in? And he says, well, because we can never actually touch another human being. So why bother? And the mathematics and philosophy professors laughed and said, yeah, but we got close enough. The concept being that we're never actually touching another human, right? We've got atoms between us when we do this. However, the joke is that, we can't tell whether we're actually touching another human or not. We feel like we're touching another human. And so when we talk about boundaries, we talk about where we end and another begins, right? So in this case, I have two circles very nearly touching with the tiniest bit of personal space in between them, right? There is our boundary right there. Okay. So Cobalt, good point. And our hearts and minds can touch from quite a distance. Okay. So here's what we're talking about. We're talking about boundaries, right? Where we end and another begins. And in some cases, there's quite a distance there. Okay. So in practice, though, especially when we or our partner may have trauma in our past or have no real experience with healthy, autonomous relationships, the shape of us may not be so clear cut, right? If we don't know who we are, if we don't know where we end and another begins, right? So we've got this image of two circles nearly touching with a good boundary between them. But in a relationship, we crave entanglement, don't we? No. We don't want entanglement. Ideally, we don't want entanglement. We don't want possessiveness. We don't want to become one. Because we can't. We cannot become one with another adult human, right? As Cobalt says, we can overlap, but not enmesh ourselves. Okay. So let's take a look at what it looks like when we don't have healthy boundaries, when we don't know where we end and another begins, and when we get involved with somebody who may not know where they end and another begins. So let's take a look at. Okay, so here we go. Ragged edges, indicating a lack of clear self-image or self-definition, right? Somebody who doesn't have a strong concept of who they are without the input of others. Empty holes and tears in the two colors represent needs not getting met through lack of communication. Muddy colors, where it's not clear who is responsible for what, who owns what part of this relationship. And if I were to guess, I'm betting that you have had more than one relationship like this. And like this image that I'm showing you, that relationship may have been beautiful in its own way, because nothing can take away the amazing potential of two humans connecting, right? But a beautiful mess is still a mess. Cobalt says, I know there is strength in the differences between us, and I know there is comfort where we overlap. Annie DeFranco. Overlap. That's where we're going to talk about the sweet spot. Okay. That is where we're going to talk about the sweet spot. So the sweet spot is where who I am and what I want from a relationship overlaps who they are and what they want in a relationship to create something more, something made of both of us. All right. So this is the image I've drawn to show the sweet spot. You can see the overlap of the yellow and the blue, but there are still boundaries in place. There is still separation and definition. Not because it's separate from each individual. These are two people creating something more, something made of both of them, the relationship itself, but to give a visual representation of what a healthy relationship with connection and collaboration and communication about boundaries keeps where we are in its own special place for both of us, right? Both of us, both the yellow and the blue, interact there. And we have boundaries around that so we know who I am, who you are, and what us do we create. Cobalt says, for me, it was more like one side totally taken over. I mean, many people could probably say the same thing. When I got out of my marriage, I wouldn't say that one side had totally taken over, but I would say that there were definitely parts of me that had drowned under the weight of expectations of the us being one forever. I had to revitalize those. Womanopolis says, very tiny space. So, how much space there is going to be different from person to person and relationship to relationship. The overlap that you have with one person might be much smaller than the overlap you have with another. The amount of clear boundaries you have with one person might be different than you have with another. Many people are much better at clear boundaries with someone they've just met than they are with a family member, right? And you might have greater overlap with your best friend than you do with your ex-spouse. Roger says, I believe if there's any kind of God, it wouldn't be in any of us, not you or me, but just this little space in between. Oh, that's Ryan. Hey, Ryan, I thought that was Roger. Haha. That is very beautiful. You said that's a quote. Then the boundaries protect these very precious things. Yes, right? Who we are. If we know who we are separate from our partner and separate from our relationships, then we can bring more of who we are and our power and our energy to each other. Does that make sense? Because the boundaries, knowing who am I and who are they, is how we can begin to even define and enjoy the sweet spot. In the book that I'm working on right now, I talk about the prime directive. And the prime directive for us in relationships is to care for and protect our own hearts and minds, and to create our relationships in the sweet spot. So, what does that look like? What are some examples of creating a relationship in the sweet spot? What does that mean to you? Cobalt says, having decided to just say no thanks to sex that's only randomly satisfying and start asking and communicating about what I want to feel. Oh, holy fuck balls. Because very few people communicate about and negotiate what they want to feel. And that's brilliant. Because by clearly asking for and communicating what you want to feel, you are first having to acknowledge ownership of your feelings, right? And that's a huge step in a relationship. I would love to feel this way. Here are some of the ways you can help me feel this way. And I know that some of these ways are things you like to do. So there, let's put that into the sweet spot, right? Let's just store it right on a shelf inside the sweet spot. Oh, well, that's a good question. Do you think we need to build an identity prior to a relationship? Yes and no. See, here's the thing. I hate rules for everyone because life just doesn't work that way. Like a lot of people, I'm sure you've heard the idea of love yourself before you can love anyone else. If you don't love you, you can't love them, right? Wrong. I think that's a bunch of bullshit. I also think that you don't have to have your identity completely figured out just to get into a healthy relationship. You don't. It's just no. But, however, on the other hand, it does help to go into a relationship being willing to listen to yourself about what you want and do not want versus tying your identity into the relationship and that other person, because that is almost always exactly how you get this mess, right? If you don't know even the general outline of where you end and others begin, we get a mess. Roger, I have a tendency to overlook places. I have had a tendency to overlook places we didn't mesh. Over time, the resentment builds and causes problems. That's why we need boundaries. That is a perfect example. Okay, so let's go back to the sweet spot diagram, right? Let's look at this. So what is, aside from the sweet spot, what do we see in this diagram? We also see the parts that are not overlapping. We see the overlap. We also see the parts that are not the overlap. In order to acknowledge that there is a sweet spot, we also have to acknowledge that there are parts that do not belong in that sweet spot. That's important, right? And so, Roger, your point to me is exactly the point I was making earlier about the idea, the insidious idea that somebody else completes us or is our other half or that we become one, because if we believe that, if we convince ourselves of all of that, we have no places to put the things where we don't mesh. We can't bring them out into the open and acknowledge them and honor them, appreciate them, accept them in each other, because if we believe we are parts of a whole, we are one, and all of these other things, then places where we don't mesh, things that we don't want together, are indications that we are failing. We are not all of those things. And that starts the unraveling. Cobalt says, I think relationship is largely how we discover who we are. In many ways, that's true. We do often discover much about who we are by the responses we get when we interact with others. The challenge is, how much weight do we give what they tell us about ourselves versus when they say that we realize that is their experience of us, right? We talked a little bit about this months ago. I talked about you are worthy, right? And I said, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of friendship. You are worthy. And some people said to me, I don't feel worthy. And some people also said, people have told me I am not worthy, right? My experience of you might be one thing. Does that define you? No. And that's the challenge when you go into a relationship without that sense of self, without knowing what you are able to take on and what you have to allow them to be responsible for themselves. Does that make sense? Roger, I would caution against the lens of building an identity as something that has a finish line. And that is another part of the yes and no answer, right? We cannot go into a relationship knowing exactly who we are, because who we are is constantly changing and shifting. And honestly, if it is a good relationship, from my perspective, a successful relationship, in my definition, is two people getting far more out of the relationship than they put in. Now, according to, let me see if I can find this, Alan Alda had a great quote about communication. And let's see if I can find it. I can't find it that quickly, but what I would say is, Alan Alda said that in order to communicate well, in order to change another, you have to be open to being changed. And that was a huge key. Here we go. Find change. I just saw that. Okay, the difference between listening and pretending to listen, I discovered, is enormous. One is fluid, the other is rigid. One is alive, the other is stuffed. Eventually, I found a radical way to think about listening. Oops, I just lost it. There we go. Real listening is a willingness to let the other person change you. When I'm willing to let them change me, something happens between us that's more interesting than a pair of dueling monologues. How's that hit you? I think that's pretty freaking fantastic, right? So what do you think about that? The idea that in order to really listen to another, you have to be willing to be changed by them. So if you are in a relationship with another human, if you are in a successful relationship with another human, presumably, I'm going to show that on the screen real quick. Presumably, you are actually going to listen to them and them to you, which means that you must be open to being changed by them and by the relationship you create together. That is the sweet spot. So no matter who you are going into a relationship, you will change in it. The question is, will the change be imposed upon you, or will it be something that you take on yourself and that you are inspired to do? So, Cobalt says, needing another to define us by reflection. I think that that is exactly what we are taught in many ways to do, is to find that one person and then devote ourselves to the image that they cast back at us. And that doesn't work, because let's take a regular mirror. We look into a regular mirror to see how we are presenting to the world, to get an overview of how we present to the world, right? If somebody spends overmuch care on that image, we call them vain, right? We tell them they need to focus on the inside, that, you know, looks are only skin deep, that you can't judge a book by its cover, yada, yada, yada. The same thing would be true if we are overly obsessed with how other people reflect us back. Like, it's good to know, hey, I'm not getting the results I want when I try to connect with people. It'd be good to know their feedback, but we can't obsess about it. We can't spend all of our time concerned with that one image, because there's so much more to us that we have to be able to take into account. Noelia says, we are a river which is never the same river through our experiences with everyone and everything. Absolutely. Yeah. We're not the same river going over the same pebble, right? We can't go past that pebble again. We change everything that we do. Twins, right? Identical twins, born identically, have radically different experiences as soon as they leave the womb. One leaves first, right? One meets ex-girl, the other one doesn't. Divergence, differences experiences. And this goes back to what Roger and I were talking about when we were talking about insidious, right? My experience of the word insidious more closely matches the definition, whereas Roger, because Roger apparently is a fan of like horror movies and thrillers, has a more insidious, evil version of the word in his head, right? So that matters as well. Cobalt says, I think I've let myself be changed too much and not taken enough responsibility for how I influence others. There you go. And if you think that, then that's something to dive into and find out more and find out, why do I think that? What can I point to that supports this? And how can I do this differently in the future? And that is a big part of what we'll be talking about as we get further into the boundaries book, and a huge part of what we will be doing in the Take No Shit workshop. Once we build our boundaries, how to maintain them and how to determine whether they are in the right places. Roger says, everyone is worthy of love. People tell us we're not as a way to punish or hurt us. It's a cliche, but you need to love yourself and be able to ignore them. Here's the thing though, you don't need to love yourself. I mean, loving yourself is ideal. I want you to love yourself. I also don't want you to think that if you don't love yourself right now, if you could even just barely tolerate yourself, that you are not worthy of love or that you cannot get into a relationship. You can, right? We're all growing. And wherever you are right now is okay. We just would like to get closer to that ideal of loving and appreciating who we are with that little bit of, and I know I can be better. And I'm inspired to be better as well, right? Rather than stagnation. And that's a balance that, you're probably going to teeter totter a little bit on that. And that's okay. That's okay. Do, 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 do. Da, da, da. I'm just reading through here. KS. They say you can't change anybody unless they change themselves. So I will say that's not entirely true. From my perspective, you can change people. Behavior modification, torture, manipulation. In fact, in most relationships, you can't help but affect others and change them in small ways. However, the difference between changing somebody and creating lasting, healthy change are radically different. And I do believe that for the most part, lasting, healthy change requires trust, love, and or buy-in, right? So I like to talk about a lot of different perspectives, right? And the idea that there are many ways to look at love, sex, relationships, and kink. And none of them are wrong unless they are harming you or others, right? Unless they are non-consensual and they do harm. So I'm not going to say that there is any one thing that a relationship has to be, or that there is any one way to do a relationship, because what your boundaries represent to you and what my boundaries represent to me could be radically different, probably are radically different, right? So the key though, and I'm gonna pull this up on the screen one more time here. The key though, the sweet spot. This graphic gives us everything we need to know about boundaries in relationships. It gives us the overlap, the space where this is what we both want. This is where we put the things that we are working on together, right? The boundary around it, that thin outline, but still an obvious outline, that's where we know it. This is who I am. That is who we are together. And that right there, that's who you are. And once we have that, once we start looking at things from that perspective, knowing I want my partner to live in the sweet spot with me in our relationship. That's when we can start making radical change in how we interact. So I'm going to pause for just a minute, and I am going to remind all of you that I am working on a book on boundaries right now, and I will pop the link into the chat and onto the screen there. Follow that link. It was supposed to go up in price. It was actually supposed to be not free as of today, but because the airline ran a little late and we had to put this off, this is the last live that I'll do with the access to the live right, free of charge. You can join there at any time, costs you nothing, and follow along as I write the book, as I write each chapter, and as I post them. So do that if you'd like to. Oh, and then everybody that is in that live right will also get access to the Take No Shit workshop at a special price. And I'd love to have you in there because, again, that's where we're going to actually, that's going to be where the rubber meets the road, and we're going to build boundaries. We're not just going to talk about them. We're not just going to ask questions about them. We're going to build them. But okay. So the sweet spot, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's wrap things up. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the chat. Cobalt asks, can you find or create a sweet spot in a contentious relationship? You can. You can find a sweet spot anywhere. If you're willing, if you are willing, you can find a sweet spot anywhere. If your partner is also willing, you can both create a sweet spot and acknowledge it and build from there. That makes sense. So the sweet spot is, this is what you want, this is what I want, right? And where they overlap, that's the sweet spot. That is where we center our relationship. So let's talk about contentious relationships. Okay, exes, like an ex-partner that you share, I'm going to say you share doggy custody with, right? Maybe you have kids, but I'm going to go with doggy custody, right? And, weekdays, doggy is with me. Weekends, doggy is with the partner. Now, I do this because I don't have a lifestyle to have a dog all of the time. Neither does my ex-partner. And we both love the dog, and we both want what's right for the dog, right? So even though my ex-partner and I might be worlds apart on so many things, we can overlap just a bit on our desire for the dog to be happy and healthy and to have our time with the dog, right? Now, we might quibble over how much time. We might quibble over the fact that, he lets the dog up on the furniture and I don't. And when the dog comes back home, the dog wants to get up on the furniture and I have to deal with all of that or whatever. But we have a sweet spot. We have a place to begin. And once we have that sweet spot, and we can leave the things that aren't in that sweet spot off the table. We don't have to interact in those areas that are not in the sweet spot, right? Or we acknowledge them and say, that's you, this is me, keep that to yourself. I don't need to know about your new girlfriend, or I don't need to know about your financial troubles, or whatever it is. We overlap where the dog's health and well-being is. If your financial troubles affect whether or not you can take the dog to your vet visit, that's a discussion we need to have because that affects the sweet spot, right? Boundaries. Healthy boundaries can create healthier communication and healthier understanding of what a relationship means to us. It also means that we can let go of things. So, for example, I don't know if any of you have been in one of those relationships where one of you is an extrovert and one of you is an introvert. I have. I tend to be, aside from really annoyed that there is jackhammering suddenly going on out there. I don't know if y'all can hear that. I tend to be the introverted one in my relationships. Now, I'm not a full introvert, like not 100%. I'm more of an ambivert, but I need a real balance between those two. I also tend to be attracted to extroverts. So, in many relationships where people feel that monogamy is the default and monogamy means you do all the things together, that's a recipe for disaster. Just today, we have a huge event going on here locally, a big Saturday into Sunday camp out, 400 people gathering, hanging out, festival atmosphere, running around, doing crazy things, a big event coming up this Saturday. Huge. And earlier today, I said to my partner, sweetie, I'm thinking about not going. I'm not feeling it. Like, I'd really like some time to just wind down a little bit, and being around that many people at that large an event this weekend is feeling 80% not me right now. And I also said, you are welcome to go on your own if you want to. You are welcome to go and have all that fun and to come back and tell me about it. I am not going to try to stop you. In fact, I want you to go have a good time if that's what you want to do. I just don't necessarily feel like I'm going to want to go. And my very extroverted partner said, you know what? I was actually kind of thinking the same thing. But there have been plenty of times when my very extroverted partner has said to something like that, that is absolutely fine. I will go and have a good time. And I hope that you enjoy your time alone, sitting with the cat on your lap and probably working. Where I end and where he begins, and finding our sweet spot. Are your earrings sugar skulls? They are skulls, but like little, I don't know, kind of tie-dyed skulls. It was a gift. KS, if you are a shy person, oh, wait, not that one. Sorry. If you are a shy person, should you get into a relationship? Oh, hell yeah. Why not? Of course you should. Okay, wait. Stop. Rewind. Should. Let's not should all over ourselves. Okay. If you are a shy person, could you get into a relationship? Yes. Could you benefit from a relationship? Yes. Might you enjoy a relationship? Absolutely. Will it be challenging to find a relationship? Probably. But there is no reason that a shy person couldn't absolutely 100% benefit from a relationship and everything that goes with it. Okay. I don't see any additional questions coming in. Let me set my tea down and prepare. Thank you. Thank you all for joining me today. Again, I'm Nookie, or Heather Claus, and I'm currently writing my next book, Boundaries Are Sexy as Fuck. That's the working title, live. Join me with the link I'm popping into the chat right now. This will be the last time that you're going to be able to get in there for free. I meant that last week. I'm telling you, airlines snarled me all up. But this time, really, by the next Tuesday live, there's going to be a small, but there's going to be a fee on that gateway to start getting into Live Right, because I'm going to be starting to get the Take No Shit workshop going, and setting people up for being beta testers and first round members of that. So please, if you want this, do not hesitate. Get in there. Would love to have you. Would love to have your feedback. Take your questions, all of those things, because boundaries are critically important. So again, thank you all for joining me. Hopefully tomorrow I will get the next few weeks of live Q&As scheduled and up. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do. Oh, yeah. And Ryan just reminded me that I am teaching a class tonight. KS, you might actually enjoy this one. I am teaching a class, Lucky in Love, where we're going to be talking about the difference between luck and chance, and how to use those differences to create your own luck in your love and relationships. So I actually had that link. There you go. So datingkinky.com/events. For those of you who may want to join tonight. Again, I'm going to be talking about luck and love, and how to use, like I said, the difference between luck and chance, and also to take advantage of chance by using luck to create a life in which you constantly feel that you are lucky in love. So super excited about this. There is a book that I read quite some time ago in which luck was actually studied and dissected, and I'm excited to be applying this to love and relationships this evening. So thank you all for joining me. Have a most wonderful